Hello, my name is Helen Anonike. I'll be presenting on the topic the perspective in psychology. And my next slide, which I'm going to be doing on a slideshow, my next slide is content my table of content, which is follows with the introduction to psychological perspective, the key assumption of identifying psychological perspective, the key theory work relating to two key theory work relating to psychological perspective, analysis of similarities, differences between two perspective in psychology, and I'll be analyzing the similarities in the difference between the two perspective in psychology, and I will be evaluating in the application of two psychological perspective to contemporary issues in psychology. And the last one is going to be my introduction. Thank you. And starting from my introduction, my research work, I'll be looking at the two psychological perspective in two psychological perspective, which is going to be followed in the humanistic and the behavioral perspective. The humanistic and perspective is emphasized on the experience, free will, and the self-actualization, while the behavioral perspective is more focused on the behavioral observable behavior and environmental determinants. So my research is going to I'll also evaluate the key theory of Carl Roger and Abraham Maslow for the humanistic perspective, and also B.M. Skinner and John Watson for the behavioral perspective, examining the strengths and the weakness of their work. And I'll follow through the fundamental assumption which is within the perspective through the comparisons of their differences and the similarities. Also use this perspective to address the contemporary issues such as anxiety disorder. The project will be driving down to argue on the distinct valuable applications and their rate in modern therapies, representing more effective approach. My chapter 2 is the literature review, which is from the behavioral historical context of the behaviorist perspective, which was launched by John Watson in 1913. And then the seminal paper psychology as an objective in natural science, which argue for radical. So redefinitions of psychology is declaring that psychology must be concerned itself solely with the observable stimuli, which is response. Stimuli and response, sorry. The philosophy was rooted empirically, viewing the organisms as blank slate, which is the tabula rasa in code, whose behavior was entirely determined by environmental impact. That was in 2001 when you go through the Ferguson in 2001. The humanistic psychological perspective emerged in 1950s to 1960s. Widely through the works of Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow work as a reaction to perceive as limited of both behaviorism and fraudulent psychodynamics. So Maslow in 1968 also criticized them for creating cripple psychology that focuses either deterministic mechanisms or pathological aspects of human nature. Humanism instead posted that individuals are active, conscious agents who construct their own reality, and they are inherently driven towards the growth self-actualization. That going through my key theory, in a continuation of this, a primary critic was When we are talking about criticism and the cognition challenges, a primary critic was his radical environmental determinism, which was seen as dehumanizing and unable to account for phenomena like language acquisition, inside learning, and biological preparedness, which was in Chomsky 1959. Social learning theory demonstrated that learning could occur through observation and internal cognitive process without any direct reinforcement. The key theory and the contribution, which is written on my slide, is in humanistic perspective, self-actualization and the person-centered approach, which was Abraham Maslow in 1943, showed an hierarchy of need, positioning self-actualization, which is the actualizations of one's full potential, as climax of human motivation. Um, Sliding down my slideshow, I've got the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization, esteem, love, belonging, safety, and physiological. Then, which is the self-actualization, speaking more of morality, creativity, spontaneous problem solving, lack of prejudice, and acceptance of facts. And then the esteem one is confidence, achievement, and respect of others and respect by others. The love, belonging are the friendship, the family, the intimacy. Safety is as also show the security of body, employment of resources, and also the morality of the family and health property. Then the physiological aspect of it is breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, which are also and in excretion. It's also added to the Maslow hierarchies of needs. Going down to my chapter 3, it's a discussion of the descriptive of the psychological perspective. The behaviorist perspective, which was founded by John B. Watson and B.F. Kanner, made an advancement which helped to shift the focus of psychological form from the subject world of mind to the objective world of behaviors. It's a principle that also behaviors are learned by interactions with the environment. Whether it's simple complex behavior, this perspective asserted that only behavioral measurements and phenomena are valid and concrete. Yeah. So concrete subject of scientific inquiry. Internal events like thought, emotions, and motive are not to be considered because they can be significantly observed and measured. The primary mechanisms of learning is essential to perspective, which is classical conditioning. That's our Pavlov. This process involved learning by associating or learning to respond to stimuli, which was a previous not given response. A neutral stimuli, example, the bell, is repeatedly paired with an unconditional stimuli, which was the example was the setting of food that trigger a response to salivation. The neutral stimuli, that is the bell, elicits a conditioned response, which is the salivation, becoming a conditional stimulus. I've also got my picture showing the unconditioned stimuli and the neutral stimuli. So in response to that, the picture is also adding with the bell, the foot and the bell, which is showing just to show the examples and the conditioned stimuli. And then moving down to my operants, that's the condition of the scanner. This involved the learning, apparent conditioning. This involved the learning through consequences of behaviors. The behaviors that are followed by reinforcement, a positive outcome and a reward, are trained and are more likely to be repeated. Behavior that are followed as punishments, that's the negative outcome, are weakened and less likely to be repeated. Skinners work meticulously to show the reward powerful shaped behaviors. So my next slide, um, on my next slide, I'll be showing okay, my next slide is a continuation of the operant condition, which is shown on the picture, the reward introduction to increase a behavior, and also the punishment to decrease a behavior. The picture as shown on my slide. Here we go. So furthermore, I'll be diving into description of the humanistic perspective. Emerging from 20th century in the 1950s to 1960s, the humanistic perspective was a reaction to perceived limitations of both behaviorism and psychoanalysis. The pioneer Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow argue that this early perspective were dehumanizing behavior by reducing people to mere products of conditioning, and psychoanalysis for focusing on pathological instinct. But humanistic psychology instead emphasized free will, personal agency, and ignite human drive towards the growth and self-actualization. Key concepts of the perspective include self-actualization. This is the ignite, overreaching motive of realizing one's full potential and becoming everything one is capable of being. It is a continuous process of growth and a self-discovery. The self-discovery of Carl Rogers proposed at individuals are personality centered on their self-concept, which include the real self, that's who one actually is, and then the ideal self, who one feels should be. Okay, so psychological health exists when there is a high degree of conquering between these two selves. Unconditional perspective regard for congruence to be achieved, an individual needs an environment that can provide unconditional positive regard, which include the acceptance and support without conditions or judgments. The congruent with the positive regard that are conditioned, where acceptance is only guaranteed by behaving in a specific way, which leads to psychological distress and incongruence. Furthermore, I would like to slide my work down to the key assumptions. Assumptions in behavioral perspective. The primary assumptions is that only observable and measurable behavior is valid to data for psychology. Behavior is learned through experience. So all the behavior in similar reflex to complex personality is learned from the environment. Through the interactions and the experience, animals and humans learn in a similar way. The fundamental assumptions of this is classical operant conditioning, which is universal to the process observed. It's in process observed. So the process is observed in controlling the experiment with animal. For example, Pavlov experiment, behavior is strictly determined by environment. That's the determinism. Proceeding in environmental stimuli and the history of reinforcement. This is a no room for autonomy. Okay, so assumption in humanistic perspective, humans have free will and also active agents who can make conscious choices, influence their own development and unconscious instincts, and are not the puppet controlled by environmental unconscious instinct. So the study of the subject experience is paramount. It's assumed that the only way to understand a person is from their own objective, conscious perspective meaning of feelings. Through perception and personal meaning is the most important data for psychology. People are in a good people inherently good have an image drive for growth. It assumes that human nature is good and positive, and this helps them achieve growth, fulfillment, and self-actualization. Holistic approach is necessary because of the whole human shows that you cannot study their part by whole. In quote. I would like to slide down to the next slide, which is the evaluation of the key theories. Showing on my screen is BF Scanner 1904 to 1990. Scanner was a radical behaviorist. He advanced the theory of apparent conditioning. His experience conduct with animal and control environments of Scanner box demonstrated how behaviors is systemically shaped by consequence of reward and punishment. On my next slide, I've got the two experiments in the box, which is shown on my slide. And I've also, on my next slide, because of time's sake, I've got the strength of his work. Greatest contribution was his inexistence and scientific observations of behavior. He also make a psychological in a clear, measurable test framework, which enhance his credibility in science, and furthermore, practical applications of his work helps in forming basis behaviors and modifications technique used in clinical setting. Example, treating phobias in education. Example, talking economic system and organizational management. This weakness was criticized, and his radical determination. He denied free will, viewing human behavior as a predictable product of their environment is a simple complex human experience to a series of stimuli and response connection. It ignores the influence of cognition like thoughts, expectation, and biological predispositions like genetics and hormonal state. That was in 1902 to 1987. Because of time's sake, a bit gonna be rushing. So analyzing the similarities and differences despite the contrast, this is been between the two perspectives, and both were evaluation which helped in treatment of certain mental conditions and even shaping the way people think and react to real situation. However, the difference is extensive, and they include the behaviorist perspective and more scientific background because focus measurables and observable behaviors, while the humanistic was subjective and lacked scientific root but had to do with experience and self-concept. Behaviorist perspective talks about the stimuli from the environment and the reinforcement of that individual has helped shape their behavior, while the humanistic has a strong emphasis on a will, agents, and personal choice autonomy. The behaviorist perspective have an external environment as its key influence and behaviors, while the humanistic key influences is an internal drive of self-actualization and for a positive regard. My next slide, because of time's sake, is a behaviorist application. A therapy called exposure therapy is a standard treatment for phobia, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a direct application of classical conditioning. The therapy works by systematical, gradually exposing an individual to fear stimuli in self-control manner, and it also a process called extinct, which is learn associated between the stimuli fear response and being broken, meaning of fears is broken by their processes. And for example, a person is a dog phobia would be gradually exposed to dogs instant for maybe pictures to being seen in the room with a calm door. But criticism over it is that it may not treat the cognitive aspect like the way they behave and thoughts are caused by the fear. The pictures are also shown gradual exposure, step 1, 2, and 3. And my next slide, because of time, it's humanistic application, which is the core person-centered therapy, which is employed in a treatment of anxiety disorder. The focus of the therapy creates a therapeutic environment which criticizes the empathy, the genuineness, condition, positioning, so therapeutic, and it helps the client to help their anxiety without any judgment And furthermore, going down because of time sake, my conclusion is that the behaviorist and the humanistic perspective offer two different strong fundamental diverging in terms of one scientific root and other doesn't. Understanding of human nature, behaviorism with its scientific approach helps to make measurable and observable observation in human behavior. Humanism has its focus on agency and subjective experiments and restore the concept of the whole psychology. Each has its own distance and weakness and strength, but their values are highly recommended. In treatment of anxiety disorder, the principles of both continue to serve its purpose in a modern practice. The next one are my references. Thank you so much. As I would like to end my video. Thank you.